actually was released in 1999. Thousands. See which one is mentioned the most frequently.
Yan lang ang kanin, no? Tignan mo mukha siya mo.
What is cracking? Huh? You got my York, my orc? My York, my York. You know? Kidney. Good one. What is there to watch? One piece of news from every country.
Across the past few decades, tourism in Iceland has blown up. This year, that phenomenon nearly took on a new meaning with a volcanic eruption not far from the famed Blue Lagoon. While far from a novelty in the land of fire and ice, the lava between the new administration in Washington, the rise of AI, and the wars in Gaza and Ukraine, news headlines in 2025 have been clogged with just a few huge, persistent stories. But plenty more was going on, hidden behind the headlines, so today, for our last video of the year, we're going to cover one piece of news from each of the 193 UN member states, starting here in the Middle East. Saudi Arabia sent a $368 million aid package to Yemen, a sum meant to build financial stability and pay for aid as Yemen continues to struggle through a now decade-long war, perpetuating one of the worst humanitarian crises on the planet. In 2014,
who knows shit about Yemen?
Houthis overthrew the government, and the Saudis led an opposition coalition since they viewed the conflict as a proxy fight with Iran. This year's large contribution to Yemen demonstrates their continued commitment to that fight. Like all oil-producing countries along the Persian Gulf, Oman's authoritarian structure allowed the ruling party to reap disproportionate financial benefits from fossil fuel sales and distribute profits less evenly in the form of subsidies to its residents. But as the future of oil becomes less stable and countries look to diversify revenue, one of the options is taxation. Oman became the first country in this area to institute an income tax this year, and though it's just 5% and applies only to those making more than $109,000 a year, the country's neighbors are closely watching, wondering if authoritarianism can survive taxation. The United Arab Emirates is also looking to diversify, and a newer core part of that strategy states to in 2034, even though organizations such as Amnesty International spoke out against the selection. Also looking to diversify its economy, Kuwait welcomed the addition of a third runway at its international airport. A new control tower was also erected as part of the nation's initiative to broaden its influence on the regional map, expanding its potential for increased passenger traffic and laying the groundwork to position itself as a major hub similar to Doha, Abu Dhabi, and Dubai. Iraq experienced one of the worst sandstorms in its history, shutting 2 of its airports and sending several thousand people to the hospital. The country is no stranger to the weather event, which reduces visibility to less than a half mile and permeates people's homes through even the smallest seams, But as climate change worsens, Iraq is listed as one of the
Fucking
United
love
Nations'
blueberries,
most
dude.
vulnerable countries to its effects, and storms like this will become more common and severe. Moving west, several countries in this region sit at a nexus of conflict in 2025. Jordan, on the border of Israel, is
I would
engaged
never
by
want to
proximity
visit
to its
any of these
neighboring
countries.
country's war. And it's dealing with the repercussions in its own way, including banning Jordan's chapter of the Muslim Brotherhood. The political Islamist group has representation in government, winning 31 out of the 138 available seats, but Jordan has long been wary of its rise because
Fucking
the Brotherhood is
blueberries,
seen
I
as
got
an ally
strawberries
of
and ice cream,
Hamas.
dude.
The ban was in response to the arrest of 16 of its members who were training militants and plotting strikes within Jordan. Jordan has been critical of the war in Gaza, and yet, in a balancing act familiar to many in the region, it maintains a long-standing peace treaty with
Netflix
Israel.
and chilled.
In Israel, despite a shaky ceasefire, the country's military campaign in Gaza has remained central in the country's politics this year. But unlike in Gaza, regular life and business in the country has continued as well, and an action by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government turned some heads. In 2023, he started a judicial overhaul that was paused after the war started that October, but this year it was revived when Israel's parliament passed a law that would give the government more power in appointing judges.
Yeah,
Some see it as a power grab by Netanyahu's far-right government, but he argues it simply gives power back to elected officials that had been taken away. More than 10,000 United Nations peacekeepers have been stationed on Israel's border with Lebanon for a quarter century to manage the volatile region where Iranian-backed Hezbollah continues to have a presence. But that will change as the UN Security Council voted to have the peacekeepers withdraw over the next year, giving autonomy to the Lebanese to control their southern border. While the withdrawal could be seen to represent increasing
God, they
stability
just
in the
bombed
region,
buildings.
it's more so that the peacekeepers' mission has
Jesus.
become obsolete. Both sides view them critically, as Hezbollah considers them sympathetic to Israel, while Israel sees them as ineffective since they cannot use force. when it's fired
Strawberries.
upon. In a step towards restoring a country from turmoil, Syria held its first parliamentary elections since the fall of ruler Bashar al-Assad in 2024, who led the country for more than a decade and held what most considered sham elections to keep hold to power. While 2025's elections were not fully free and fair, the fact that they happened in 2/3 of districts brings some power back to the people and their ability to choose representation, marking an important step towards the goal of true popular vote democratic elections later on. This resource-rich region continues to search for more natural gas and oil reserves as demand spikes while Europe steers away from dependence on
Isn't
Russia.
it weird to think that
Another
Cyprus
natural gas
is
field was
in
found
Asia?
119 miles or 190 kilometers south of
It
Cyprus,
just doesn't make
its
sense.
exclusive economic zone, helping to further that goal. The deposit, discovered by a consortium including ExxonMobil and Qatar Energy International, is the 6th natural gas field to be discovered in the zone in the past 15 years. Political unrest continues in Turkey, where Istanbul's mayor Ekrem İmamoğlu remains behind bars on accusations of corruption and espionage. İmamoğlu is widely seen as President Erdogan's biggest political rival. Under Erdogan's rule, Turkey has grown increasingly authoritarian, and the charges against İmamoğlu, for many, represent just one more step in that direction, as they're viewed as a means to silence Erdogan's largest opposition. Tensions, however, between Armenia and Azerbaijan seem to be quieting as a peace deal between the countries was signed in August. The neighbors have been fighting over the Nagorno-Karabakh region since the end of the Cold War, and the 17-page treaty
What is there to fight about?
outlines set protocols
You know,
for
it's
bringing
rubble.
some stability to the disputed lands. The former Soviet state of Georgia was home to several nuclear sites during those unified years in the 80s, and even today, uranium remains in the country. But this year, a group of Chinese nationals attempted to purchase some of it, 4.4 pounds or 2 kilograms for $400,000, but their efforts were thwarted when police swarmed their car with 2 glass jars of the substance in the trunk. The arrest signifies a larger issue in that even though it's illegal to sell and transport uranium, which can be enriched for nuclear weapons, the lack of control over the country's remaining supply of the compound makes it a viable black market source for the extremely dangerous material. In Iran, aging water storage and transport infrastructure is exacerbating a years-long drought that peaked in July when temperatures reached 125 degrees Fahrenheit or 52 degrees Celsius. Residents in the capital of Tehran were
How
asked
do
to
you
limit
survive
water
that?
consumption due to the country's dwindling reservoirs, as officials looked to neighboring countries to import water and additionally instituted power cuts to deal with the heat wave. All signs of the warming planet's effects on daily life. 5 Central Asian countries, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan, met for their
That's a lot of
first summit
stands,
with the
dude.
European Union to address trade, counterterrorism, climate, and energy independence. The region's ties to Europe have become more critical since the Russian
Look at all
invasion
these
of Ukraine,
stands.
and these countries are looking to diversify their economies and geopolitical strategies. One of
They
the
should just
major
combine
projects
it to
to
become
progress
one
these goals is a
super sad
trans-Caspian
state.
transport corridor, which connects China to Europe while bypassing Russia and eliminating ship transport through the Suez Canal. The region's shifting alliances and jockeying for mineral rights, part of Europe's interest in the region, are also shadowed by human rights concerns, which was a main topic for the summit in ensuring that quick-paced development considers residents and their environment. Mongolia
Yeah,
typically
they should.
makes
Yeah,
news for
they
its
should
vast
become
and
one
wild
super sad
lands,
country.
home to nomadic tribes, but this year, an unusually public political controversy played out when the country's prime minister, Zandashatar Gomboyev, was ousted in a vote by the country's ruling Mongolian People's Party after just 4 months in charge. The internal struggle boiled up between Gomboyev and the leader of the opposition party, Amar Bayaskalan Daskiev. Gomboyev lost a party leadership election to him, and accusations about corruption flew between the two. It left the country in disarray ahead of budgeting at a time when teachers and doctors were striking for higher wages. China released its latest 5-year strategic plan, a hugely important guiding policy document, and this edition was all about increasing its autonomy. The plans call for chip independence in a direct response to its ongoing chip war with the United States, where the Asian nation is catching up to historical American dominance in the field. Additionally, as America pulls back its own scientific funding and research, China plans to continue to invest and keep its title as the world's biggest R&D spender, to the tune of $505 billion in 2023. All of this is evident of how, these days, global dominance is largely being fought through the tech sector. It's been more than 4 years since the Taliban reassumed control of Afghanistan, but this year, Russia became the first country to officially recognize them as the country's government. In an effort to encourage diplomatic ties, the Taliban have tried to present a more moderate stance, curbing things like opium production, but their oppressive policies towards women, which ban them from most education, work, and public places, have repelled most of the world. The acknowledgement from Russia opened the door for opportunistic cooperation on trade and energy production. Since the Taliban took over power in Afghanistan, attacks by Tehrik-e-Taliban have significantly increased in neighboring Pakistan. The Taliban government denies involvement, but it's widely believed the TTP receives funding from them and that its fighters train in Afghanistan. This ensuing conflict escalated in the fall, with the countries exchanging airstrikes and fire, resulting in dozens of deaths and injuries. And though a ceasefire was negotiated, it's tenuous because the underlying reason, Taliban committing violence in Pakistan, remains. The world's most polluted city, Delhi, India, tested out cloud seeding as a way to eliminate pollution from its hazy skies for the first time in more than 5 decades. Seeding uses aircraft and drones to release silver iodide into the atmosphere, which acts like ice and builds clusters of water droplets that increase rainfall, something that in turn captures pollutants as it comes down. But in this test case, there wasn't enough moisture in the air to make rain. Officials will try again, but critics are wary of a band-aid approach to the problem instead of addressing the root cause, which is centered on a combination of crop burning, factories, and heavy traffic. As India tries to strengthen its presence in the Indian Ocean, a region fiercely contested due to China's ambitions to control its seas and shipping routes, it extended a $565 million line of credit to the Maldives, which is a cash-strapped but strategically critical partner to India. The step enhances the two countries' ties, despite Maldives President Mohamed Muizzu previously expressing a preference and strategy that would be viewed as pro-China. A nationwide power outage in Sri Lanka that left the island of 22 million people without electricity wasn't found to be caused by infrastructure failure.
Gotta put my ice cream in the freezer. Also, just eat the whole thing.
And caused enough damage to affect the entire country, something that highlights 2 problems that Sri
And
Lanka
we don't want
has.
that.
An enormous monkey population, with estimates around 2 to 3 million, and a vulnerable and aging energy grid that can be brought down by one small creature. Tens of thousands of Gen Z protesters took to the streets of Nepal this year, initially in response to perceived censorship by the government on social media apps, and their uprising worked surprisingly well, ousting the prime minister in just days. One consequence was the appointment of the country's first female prime minister, Sushili Karki, who will lead the interim government until new elections take place in 2026. Karki was Nepal's former chief justice and is seen as a critic of the corruption that many, including the wave of Gen Z activists, saw creeping into their government. Tourism in Bhutan continues to see double-digit growth, drawing largely from India and America for its visitor base. To meet this demand, the government instituted a tourism registration system that streamlines hotel check-ins and makes sure that guests stay at valid properties, while also collecting data from visitors and providers in order to manage the growth of the industry in an effort to keep it sustainable and secure. Upstream from Bangladesh, China started construction on the world's largest megadam, a $124 billion project that will consist of 5 Cascade hydropower stations and produce an estimated 300 million megawatt hours of electricity. The problem from Bangladesh, however, is that the dam is being built on the Yarlung Sangpo River, and residents are concerned that the dam could impact millions of users downstream, where residents rely on the river for sustenance and agriculture.
Oh, man,
Bangladesh and India have
Bangladesh.
also raised concerns that
What a
upstream water
Bangla
control
trap.
could be weaponized by China.
Alright.
Bangladesh's shared border with Myanmar has been an escape route for Rohingya refugees fleeing the civil war there, which is stretching into its 4th year. Since 2017, Bangladesh has hosted more than 1 million Rohingya, but the government is now turning them back to Myanmar, a country that stripped the mostly Muslim ethnic minority of their citizenship more than 40 years ago and continues genocidal violence, according to the United Nations. Without papers and authority to cross borders, it leaves the Rohingya in a dire situation. Thailand elected its 3rd prime minister in 3 years, naming business tycoon Anutin Charnvirakul to lead the country. And though Charnvirakul might come across as casual with his pro-cannabis stance and karaoke singing ways, he's a shrewd and conservative leader who swings the country's trajectory away from the populist direction it was headed. Although he'll have to do it with his hands tied, as supporting parties have demanded he hold another election for representative seats shortly after taking office. Tensions between Thailand and Cambodia over their 500-mile border escalated this year, reaching a peak with a 5-day armed conflict in the summer. Although they signed a tenuous ceasefire, peace negotiations have stalled as flare-ups and accusations continue to fly between the two countries. Both continue to place restrictions on each other as well, limiting certain items they typically trade like fruits and vegetables, as well as reducing access to the internet and shortening visa stays. China's continual expansion of energy development and its impacts on other countries also stretches into Laos, where it's built the
all look
largest
the same
onshore
to me.
wind farm in Southeast Asia, featuring 133 turbines for nearly $1 billion. The monsoon wind power projects, built by Power China and run by a Thai consortium, doesn't actually deliver any power to Laos, but instead ships it across the border to Vietnam. Another example of how one of the planet's biggest greenhouse gas emitters exploits the resources of neighboring countries. Low birth rates and their potential impacts on populations and economies is a problem that countries are facing in different ways. In Vietnam, the government is reversing a decades-old policy that limited families to 2 children in hopes of bringing that average birth rate back above 2 children per woman. Additionally, the government has gone as far as to offer financial incentives for having more children before 35 and for shortening the time between births, all in an effort to stave off the effects that declining populations have on long-term economic prospects. Moscow residents looking to get away can now fly 8 hours nonstop to North Korea, signifying a deepening tie between the two countries. The pair already share a defense pact and cooperate in military operations, as North Korea has sent troops and weapons to Russia for its war in Ukraine. The monthly Moscow-Pyongyang flight is operated by Norwind Airways, which previously focused on flights to vacation destinations before the EU's airspace ban hampered its operations. Conventional tourism is still banned in North Korea, but groups of Russians and other foreigners have been allowed to trickle in as it opens its border, most notably seen in the debut of a East Coast beach resort expected to draw some 20,000 people. The birth rate in South Korea is dismal at just 0.74 births per woman, but even that low number is an improvement on 0.72 in 2023 and marks the sharpest percentage increase since the early 90s. That's primarily thanks to policy initiatives including baby bonuses and cash rewards. Seoul alone spent more than $270 billion over the past 16 years on childbirth incentives.
Nobody's
And yet,
giving birth
even with
anymore,
that huge
dude.
investment, officials still think it's not enough to stave off a precipitous population decline. Rice is a food staple in Japan, but depleted crops due to heat wave and
It's just gonna be
consumption from tourists,
Africans and Indians, dude.
increased prices so
'Cause all they do
drastically
is
in the country
fuck.
that it's looking to South Korea for cheaper imports. South Korea will export rice to Japan for the first time since 1999, marking an economic and cultural shift for the country, which previously snubbed foreign rice imports as inferior. Maritime confrontations between the Philippines and China continually take place in the South China Sea over contested waters, but in a more aggressive incident this year, 2 Chinese ships accidentally collided during a chase of a Philippines patrol boat, and the United States deployed 2 of its own warships to demonstrate support for its Philippines ally. Surrounding countries are fighting over fishing, economic zones, and disputed waters in the area, and though US patrols regularly pass through, the appearance in reaction to Chinese aggression does raise the temperature. The South Pacific is home to rich habitat and diverse ecosystems where populations of orangutans, one of the most genetically similar primates to humans, used to thrive. Today, however, wide swaths of forest are being cleared in Indonesia specifically to harvest meranti, a wood specialized to the area that's lightweight, moisture resilient, flexible, and used primarily in American motorhomes and recreational vehicles. This year, scientists in Indonesia and Malaysia released a study about orangutans who were relocated when forests were cleared for logging, and in nearly 1/3 of the cases tracked, those animals attempted to return home after translocation. Singapore held its first parliamentary election in 5 years, and though some speculated that the opposition party was gaining momentum, citizens re-emphasized their contentment with the status quo by keeping the People's Action Party in charge. The party experienced near record low turnout in 2020, but this year's results extend their 6-decade reign in politics, choosing what some call stability in a time when the country is dealing with global trade disruptions. Home to the world's second largest port, Singapore is disproportionately exposed to fluctuations in international trade, so minimizing those impacts is key to the People's Action Party's success. Despite widespread economic sanctions, Russia continues to search for markets for its exports, and one of those is Brunei.
Nah,
The
dude.
small country on the
Indians.
South China Sea received its first shipment of Russian oil through the Northern Sea route. Previously, the Arctic route had been limited to shipping to China, but this extension is the result of a deliberate push by Russia to market the NSR route, which links the country's western ports to Asia during the summer and fall and cuts shipping time by 10 days in bypassing the Suez Canal. Russia's diplomatic relationship with Brunei is key for the country as it tries to maintain a presence in the ASEAN, or Association of Southeast Asian Nations, region. The group is a bloc of regional countries that are unified in economic and security interests, and in 2025, East Timor became the 11th country to join. East Timor, which was ruled by Portugal for 3 centuries, only achieved independence in 2002, so its entry into ASEAN was seen as a momentous next step for the small country in trying to achieve stability. Sydney, Australia's new airport saw its first jet flight this year as it nears its opening date for passengers in late 2026.
Oh,
Brand
they
new
have a new
airports of this
airport?
scale are rarely built these days, making the opening significant, and the facility is expected to one day rival London's Heathrow Airport in terms of passenger capacity. Sydney's current airport, the primary gateway to the entire country, is stretched to capacity and hampered by its 11 p.m. curfew, but this new Western Sydney airport will operate 24 hours a day thanks to its more rural location. The ruling right-wing coalition in New Zealand voted to reverse the government's ban on offshore oil and gas exploration. The country has a significant cost of living crisis that high energy prices and shortages have contributed to, and although the reversal is being portrayed as in response to these difficulties, it simultaneously takes New Zealand off of its trajectory towards carbon neutrality. Furthermore, the coalition plans to boost mineral exports to $3 billion by 2035 and cut funding to conservation and climate initiatives.
Yeah.
In a deal that's as official as becoming blood brothers, the largest and most populous South Pacific nation, Papua New Guinea, signed a defense treaty with Australia, inking the declaration that they have each other's backs. The alliance, years in the making, means Australia can rely on Papua New Guinea for access to the island nation's military infrastructure, while Papua New Guinea can rely on its larger neighbor for security and deterrence. The move comes as China continues to expand its presence and power in the region, and this pact is the most recent attempt
Better watch
for
out
West
for
to
China,
counter
dude.
that spreading influence. Palau is ground zero for the consequences of climate change, but this year it made news for another reason. It rejected a proposal from the United States to send asylum seekers to the tiny island nation. As America ramps up its anti-immigration efforts and looks to send people away, it offered Palau up to $100,000 per deportee for a total of $7.5 million to accept 75 people. But despite the money and deep relationship with the US, officials on the island said it was not worth the cost and potential security concerns, leaving America to look to other countries.
Yeah.
After several years of delay, the Federated States of Micronesia are now linked, technologically. A 140-mile, $95 million undersea cable now connects several Micronesian islands, including Pohnpei, its largest, to an existing cable linked to Guam. The fiber optic East Micronesia cable, a joint venture by Japan, the United States, and Australia, will benefit some 100,000 people in the oceanic area by bringing cheaper, faster internet and communications. 6 years after a Hong Kong-owned ship ran aground on coral east of Rennell Island in the Solomon Islands, damaging the reef and lagoon, killing wildlife, and contaminating drinking water, the landowners and government are finally seeking justice. They are suing a handful of companies potentially liable for damage caused by the spill, as up until this point, nothing more than an apology had been issued despite widespread damage and assumed long-term health consequences. The first members of what's known as the NYZQ cohort, a group of hundreds of long-term immigrant detainees in Australia, were sent to Nauru as part of a 30-year, $2.5 billion deal. The group were immigrants to Australia who had been convicted of crimes, served their sentences, but then had their visas revoked due to their crimes. While most in this situation would be deported, this cohort couldn't be for various reasons like lacking identity documents,
Oh,
refusal
so
by their home
Australians
country,
get
or
sent to
refugee
another
status,
island?
meaning they were stuck in legal limbo. The High Court in Australia ruled they couldn't be held indefinitely in immigration detention if they had no viable path to deportation, so Australia struck a deal with Nauru to transfer them there with long-term visas. The ruling and subsequent agreement with Nauru was shrouded in some levels of secrecy and criticized by human rights groups. Australia, on the other hand, is welcoming residents of Tuvalu with an offer of climate visas. The tiny nation, comprising 9 islands that span just 10 square miles, is increasingly succumbing to the effects of climate change as its waters rise and affect infrastructure and drinking water. Australia offered a first-of-its-kind live-and-work climate change visa to Tuvalu residents, and more than half the country of 10,000 people have already applied. Geography constrains the super skinny Marshall Islands, meaning it has little ability to field a soccer team, mostly due to its lack of pitch space and general interest. But in 2025, it became the last country in the world to put together a national team and play its first match. Never mind that the game took place 6,200 miles away in Arkansas, where the largest population of Marshall Island expatriates live, the Marshallese were thrilled to finally play an 11-a-side game after dedicating years to its creation, even if they lost 0-4 to the US Virgin Islands. Vanuatu offers a Golden Passport program where foreigners can spend about $130,000 to purchase citizenship to the island nation. Criticisms of the program, however, arose in cases like Andrew Tate's. He was arrested in 2022 for human trafficking and rape in Romania and purchased the citizenship around the same time, highlighting the appeal of the program to criminals looking to escape authorities. Despite still being under investigation, this year Vanuatu said it would not revoke his citizenship. As heavy, more intense rainfall on the Pacific Island countries of Fiji, Samoa, and Tonga increases, so too do cases of dengue fever. The potentially deadly viral illness is spread by Aedes mosquitoes, which flourish in humid, hot, moist environments, the kind that are proliferating in these low-lying countries.
Oh yeah, I do have a bit more weed. I have a
pushes
little
them
bit
to the
of
highest
hash in
infection
my
level more than a decade, despite intense efforts to
another
fight
mouth
mosquitoes, and
in
several other
another
nations declared
whatever
a medical
bowl.
emergency. The Pacific region is home to unquantifiable potential for deep-sea mining of critical minerals used in computer chips, and there is an international race to lead this charge. Nations here are approaching it differently, with some hesitant to exploit a natural resource for quick gain, but others, like Kiribati, are increasingly headed towards inking deals. This year, it announced a potential partnership with China to commercially mine Kiribati's economic exclusion zone.
Well, where's Europe?
Instead, they keep them out of poverty. The U.S. has been heavily... The crackdown has played out on the border with... Across the past few decades, tourism in Iceland has blown up. This year, that phenomenon nearly took on a new meaning with a volcanic eruption not far from the famed Blue Lagoon. While far from a novelty in the land of fire and ice, the lava-spewing fissures opening across the landscape required an evacuation of the area. The nation's tourism board was quick to communicate that the incident would have no implication to the capital city or the international airport, though. Difficulties in the tourism economy were felt elsewhere in the Northern Atlantic, as for years, humpback whales just off the coast of Ireland paid the bills for Cork whale watchers. But recently the whales have been harder and harder to spot, and thus business has been harder, culminating in the company closing its doors this year. Following the whales have simply gone elsewhere, making it another clear sign to activists that the government isn't doing nearly enough to protect its waters from overfishing. An island away, 2025 has seen much made about how to treat the English Channel. British PM Keir Starmer authored a letter to France's president urging the nation to help stop small boats leaving the French coast headed to the United Kingdom from taking off. The move was made to attempt to slow the arrival of refugees and asylum seekers into the UK, as nearly 40,000 had already arrived in 2025 alone, pushing it into a major political issue for the new Labour government. In the notoriously environmentally conscious Norway, 2025 saw Parliament pass legislation that opens previously protected rivers to potential damming for the purposes of hydropower. That move is controversial as, on the one hand, it opens the door for increased low-carbon power production, but on the other, critics are quick to point out that damming and effectively destroying wild rivers hardly resembles anything green or renewable to begin with. If one were to closely monitor the movement of Sweden's Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson, they'd simply need a bit of creativity and the Strava app. Using the fitness mapping app, an investigation by a Swedish newspaper this year was able to figure out the PM's preferred jogging routes and travel spots by looking at the activities of his security guards. It was an obvious security blunder and another reminder as to how the most innocent-seeming social media sharing can create major security breaches. In both Finland and Denmark, policymakers moved to ban phones from the classroom this year. In countries that annually rank towards the top in public education and overall happiness, perhaps it's a surprise that it's taken this long to ban phones from the classroom. Citing not only education outcomes, but also self-esteem issues and the increased digitization of daily life, both bans come at the national level. Estonia, however, has opted to go the opposite direction. In Estonian schools, cell phones are being embraced as tools. With the launch of the AI Leap 2025 initiative, Estonia is leaning into artificial intelligence within its school systems as a tool to further enhance outcomes. As a nation that has quietly climbed up education rankings, embracing AI in schools may seem bold to the outside world, but a logical progression within the country. Another Baltic state has launched a rather unique education program, but for a far different purpose. In Latvia, the country's intelligence and security service published a guide for its general populace to help better identify potential Russian spies. People lingering near important sites, unkempt tourists, and talkative, overly nosy strangers were some stereotypes that the service noted for Latvians to avoid and report. Russian meddling also informed public education efforts in Lithuania. In a joint effort between the military and the nation's education department, the country has set a goal of educating some 22,000 Lithuanians on drone skills, from building them to flying them, to keep up with its eastern neighbor, which quickly matched Ukraine in its drone manufacturing and warfare capabilities. The program is aiming to educate kids beginning as young as 8 years old with proper introductory classes and opens several drone training centers in the coming years. Russia has been sending shockwaves across much of the rest of the world for years now, and 2025 was no different. With an 8.8 magnitude earthquake just off its eastern coast triggering tidal wave alerts across the Pacific in July, even Russian nature has been cause for international headaches. For its part, though, the earthquake also may have played a role in triggering a dramatic volcanic eruption in the country's far east. Near no major population centers, the Krasheninnikov eruption is not noteworthy in terms of damage done, but for its rarity, as this volcano hasn't erupted in some 600 years. In 2025, political leadership in Belarus released 52 political prisoners in a move that would seem to counter trends within the increasingly authoritarian state. But the move was little cybersecurity laws instituted in 2021. Hunt is being held in...
Ain't nobody got time for motherfucking Africa, dude. Africa, get the fuck out of here, get the fuck out of here, fucking Africa, get the fuck out. Where the fuck is Ella Pernell? Huh? Num, num, num, num, num. EMP Yoshi Pash. Just Low German? What the fuck is Low German? The Ultimate Super Nintendo? What's the Ultimate Super Nintendo? It comes with a sticker.
The Super Nintendo is an amazing console with a legendary library of games. I bought mine in the early 2000s from a local electronics boutique for about 15 bucks, and it's been one of the best pickups I ever got. I had the privilege of owning some of the most amazing RPGs of the era, like Chrono Trigger and Final Fantasy III, or 6 depending on where you live. But it occurred to me that I never made a video modding the system. That changes today as I attempt to build the ultimate Super Nintendo.
A friend of mine had the Atari Lynx,
Hey
so
everyone,
I
how's
just
it
thought it
going?
was cool.
My name is Tito, and welcome to another episode of Retro Renew. Today, I'll be attempting to build a fully kitted out Super Nintendo. It's kind of hard to believe that I have yet to mod one of these consoles on the channel, but we'll be diving in headfirst, installing some pretty cool mods. Now, first and foremost, I have to give a huge thank you to Rob, who goes by the name of Raw Talent. He actually approached me with this project, mentioning that I lack Super Nintendo content on this channel, and he's absolutely right.
Yeah,
Raw
no
Talent
Super
makes these
Nintendo.
absolutely beautiful custom shells for pretty much every single console out there. He actually did this amazing custom shell for one of my PS2s, and I absolutely love it.
Nah,
You
that's
definitely
sick.
need to check him out on Instagram, which I'll leave a link to down below. He gets a lot of his parts from another modder named Duncan, who kindly sent all 3 of the very cool Super Nintendo mod kits that I'll be installing.
Fuck.
Named Duncan, who kindly sent all 3 of the very cool Super Nintendo mod kits that I'll be installing. Alright, so in this video, I'll go over all the parts I'll be using to build the ultimate Super Nintendo. Then I'll show you how to put it all together, go over all of its unique features, review the pros and cons, and of course provide you with my overall thoughts. So the first item we have is the shell itself. Now, while it looks great on camera, it looks even better in person. I'm not sure what kind of paint Raw Talent uses, but this thing looks fantastic. It sort of looks like the paint they use on fancy sport cars with its sparkling aesthetic. And the Super Nintendo logo, along with all the small details, just really make this shell pop. Now, something I'm sure some of you may have noticed immediately is that the shell doesn't look like an American Super Nintendo. And that's because this is actually a PAL Super Nintendo, which looks identical to the Super Famicom. So to go with this shell, Raw Talent actually sent me a PAL motherboard, a SNSP CPU-002 revision board to be exact. So with this PAL board, you may be asking, how will I be able to play my American library of games since the Super Nintendo is in fact region locked? Well, Duncan Mods sent me a Super CIC mod chip, which will allow this PAL Super Nintendo to play games from any region. I'm really looking forward to installing this. Next, we have this RGB filter board. While I will be installing this kit, after speaking with some modders that are more knowledgeable about the Super Nintendo than I am, this is probably not the best mod to get crispy RGB. Be sure to stay tuned for the pros and cons section of the video, and I'll explain this in more detail. And the last mod I'll be doing is the De-Jitter mod. This mod helps improve compatibility with capture cards and some television sets, as the Super Nintendo does sometimes have inconsistent sync, which can cause problems trying to get it to display on a screen. Alright, so that's everything I'll be using to build
There's a
the
lot of
ultimate Super
stuff
Nintendo.
that doesn't really do
But
a lot
before
of
we
stuff.
get into the installation portion of the video, let's talk about the sponsor of today's video, PCBWay. So I left several links in the video description to help you with your particular installation. Anyway, using hot air, we'll start by removing the CIC region lockout chip. Next, we'll lift pin 24 on PPU1, and then lift pin 30 on PPU2. Now, go ahead and drop in the Super CIC board onto the CART pins on the bottom of the motherboard, ensuring that the orientation is correct. Then, solder the Super CIC to the CART pins as shown. There are only about 18 pins that need to be soldered. Now comes the
Dude, he's such a cock.
chin, which is also why I like the buzz cut, because it like emphasizes your chin and your like heavy brow. Like I would argue you have one of the most part of the reason why I don't want to have a child with you is because I'm terrified if we have a girl that she's gonna have all your masculine features.
Isn't that interesting? I think about that a lot.
Yeah, fascinating because like if I look at you,
Holy shit, dude. It's what? Oh my,
wiring
it's
process. You'll
oh,
need to make roughly 8
jeez.
connections, and these can differ depending on which motherboard revision you have, especially with how you choose to route the wires. There's no right way to do this, but to keep things tidy, especially since you'll need to make connections on the other side of the board, you can route the wire through small vias that are scattered throughout the board. I like to feed the wire through a via that is close to the connection that I need to make. Again, I'll have links to the installation instructions for each of these mods down below for your reference.
Damn, that is ugly looking, dude.
Now that we made all the wire connections, let's install the RGB filter mod. To do this, we first need to remove transistors Q3, Q5, and Q7. Once removed, I was given a few ceramic caps that actually need to be installed alongside existing caps to alter their capacitance. Again, this is specific to my model, and your specific revision motherboard will likely be different.
Looks like a little toilet.
Great, so now that all the prep is done for the RGB filter, I added some double-sided tape to it and stuck it right below the Super CIC board. I then proceeded to wire in all the connections.
Dude. Is this worth it for Super Nintendo? I don't think this is worth it for Super Nintendo. There's a lot of wiring going on right now. A lot of stuff.
And here's what the Super CIC and RGB filter look like fully installed. Now, in order to prep the motherboard for the dejitter mod, we need to remove a couple resistors, so let's go ahead and do that. I like to add fresh solder and then contact both pads at the same time with my iron to whisk the resistor off the board. Again, I added some double-sided tape to the back of the dejitter board, and then this time I stuck it above the Super CIC board. Now I went ahead and made all my connections. So keep in mind, I installed all of these mods in a specific order. For most motherboard revisions, installing the Super CIC first, followed by the RGB filter, with the dejitter last should be best and keep the install clean and easy.
I'm gonna piss watching this.
Now here you can see that I soldered in 2 wires, and what these are going to do is they're going to power the LED board that illuminates the Super Famicom logo on the shell. Once those wires are in, we can begin to assemble the console.
Yeah, I wanna take a piss. Oh. Take a pass. A pass.
Now we're going to go ahead and set up the case LEDs. So with this custom board, we're actually going to bridge all these pads together except for ground. This will allow all 4 LEDs to light up at the same time. Alright, once that's done, I added some double-sided tape to the front of the board as shown, and then stuck it in place to the top shell. I then proceeded to wire it using the 2 wires I soldered in previously. I made the wires long enough to give me more than enough slack to work with. Then I dropped the top shell onto the bottom and buttoned it all up. And there you have it, the ultimate Super Nintendo. This is quite possibly the most beautiful Super Nintendo that I have ever seen. The shell is simply stunning, and now I have a way to play any game from any region.
Hey, cool.
I can't believe it took me this long to mod a Super Nintendo, but let's take a look at it. And the first thing I want to cover is the shell. I know I've already spoken about it, but the paint job is super intricate and it just looks amazing. The blend of sparkling paint and some matte finishes with the beautiful details really make this shell look fantastic. Also, when you turn the console on, we have this illuminated Super Famicom logo, which again adds to the overall visual impact of this console. Anyway, getting into the actual mods themselves, let's discuss the Super CIC mod chip. So, like I said earlier, this is a PAL region Super Nintendo. But if I go ahead and insert a Japanese game like Seiken Densetsu
what
3,
did he do to the
you'll
video
notice that
game?
it boots right
Did he
up,
win?
which is awesome.
Did
Now,
he
I
do
don't
it?
have any PAL games to test out, but
Did
I
he
do
get a
have a
mallet
small collection
memory?
of American games. Now, in order to run an American game on a PAL or Japanese region Super Nintendo, you'll need an adapter like this one, which Raw Talent also sent over. American cartridges are squared off on the bottom, while both PAL and Japanese region games have a more rounded front. Needless to say, American games do not fit into PAL or Japanese consoles. So, using the cart adapter on the PAL system and then inserting an American game like this copy of Chrono Trigger results in region switching to NTSC, and the game runs perfectly. That's the thing I love most about the Super CIC mod chip. It can auto-detect the region of the game and then switch to it. It's really convenient. Now you can also switch the region manually if you want to by pressing and holding the reset button. But unfortunately my kit is missing the LED which indicates the region using different colors. But that almost doesn't seem like a necessary feature given the fact that this console can now switch regions automatically. Alright, the next thing I want to discuss is the D-Jitter mod. Like I mentioned earlier, the Super Nintendo as well as the original NES have
that shit's gay. You're gay. You're gay as fuck, nigga. The fuck out of you, gay ass nigga, gay. Mm. Ja. Mm. Mm. Pretty cool. Mm. For a whore. Sick. It's so gross. I don't like. Oh, hey, get Tony. Hey, oh, hey. You know. You have anything we could watch? We can buy you. Huh? like.
Are you serious? Yes. No, are you serious? Yes. Say it again. I broke up with you. Okay.
Oh wow, that's gross. Chaba, chaba, chaba. Oh yeah, you seen the new what's that game called? Huh? The zombie game that's so popular. You know what I mean? Project Zomboid. forgot to bring my key. I hear we got a new update build 42. I hear it's different now. It looks different and stuff.
To their visual range can be tricky to master.
Alright, I wasn't that different. Never mind. Mr. Atomic.
Each Project Zomboid playthrough is built around a few key goals, foundational pillars that course and safe houses. Vehicles representing a major milestone that every player aims to achieve, safe houses fundamentally changing a playthrough by providing an entirely unique environment to call your own. But what if we could combine these two core features into one? Enter RV Interiors, a massively popular mod from Build 41 with over 1.8 million subscribers to date, left abandoned since the release of Build 42 for over half a year now. With over 1.8 million subscribers to date, left abandoned since the release of Build 42 for over half a year now. That is, until recently, with the release of a newly adapted version of the all-time fan favourite known as Project RV Interior, you can take your safe house on the move with you. We're about to jump into all you need to know. Coming up next, you keep in mind that fresh
Who the fuck is this? Oh, M-chan, really? Oh, really? Oh my god, this is so sad. He's a... Dude, yeah, this is like the big, oh my god, she's like on, oh my... She's like the incel queen. All the incels love her. She's so pathetic, just dumb attention whore. She's not even... Gross. Yeah, yeah. I'm just tired of it. I'm just tired of this shit, dude. I don't know. There's like nothing cool going on the YouTube or the anything anywhere. It's just blurt. Everything is just like hey, habadigang, you know. Slow day at Professor Chernoby's place. Professor Chernobyl.
We've all thought it, right? If the world ended today and the undead hordes filled the streets, where could we find safety? How could we survive? Well, the first place that comes to the minds of many is something just like this. A sealed bunker hiding a secret base beneath the ground, stocked with resources, crafting materials, and sustenance to keep you alive in the apocalypse. But I don't have any of that. All I have is a desolate, abandoned bunker, and that is where our story begins. As I awoke in this new frontier and rummaged through the drawers and shelves of this small hole in the ground, I first had to set forth a key goal to accomplish before this journey was done. And of course, ignoring the most blindingly obvious goal of not dying, my goal for this adventure was to convert this bunker into a home stocked with everything I'd need to survive. That wasn't as simple as you might think, however. Finding weapons, food, water, tools, power, meds, and a vehicle, and doing all of that while avoiding the ever-present clutches of death was quite the task. So I had plenty of items to check off before we could call it a successful day out. After making my way through the cupboards inside the bunker and acquiring a few essentials, namely a shovel with which I could defend myself, I exited the safe confines of this humble home and laid eyes on the surrounding forest. Opening my map for the first time, I was able to uncover the secrets of my surrounds. Initially, in most Project Zomboid adventures,
what if they break the
you're gonna need
door?
to focus on food and tools. Without either of those, you would be pretty much screwed. Unfortunately, outside the boundaries of this forest were a number of buildings. Now, full transparency, these could be burnt down hotels, morgues, infested hospitals, or worse, strip clubs. That is to say, I was completely unfamiliar with this area, so I just headed to the building closest to me. As I escaped the tree-filled landscape of my forest surrounding my home, I crossed a nearby road and laid eyes on my first rotting friends. Knowing that tools may be hard to come by, I opted to take care of them the old-fashioned way. A quick shove with these giant, thick, broad shoulders was often all it took. So simple I couldn't help but express a thoroughly masculine grunt. This first building appeared to be some kind of diner. I first checked the vehicles in front of it. Each vehicle was in and of itself a mystery box. You could only help to pull the elite legendary drop, the functional car with gas and a key. But this time, no gas to be found. Inside the building was, as to be expected, a clean diner, abandoned at the beginning of the apocalypse. The first thing I found was an amazing get, a supermarket cart, which would make it infinitely easier to lug stuff back and forth to the bunker, given I didn't have a car. Well, not yet, at least. Luckily, there was a decent starting supply of food within the diner, but given that my bunker didn't even have a fridge at this point, there'd be no use lugging this all back since it would just rot before I'd even get to use it. Instead, I took some non-perishables and some wine. This adventure would be a lonely one. Perhaps in this silent, lonely world, I could seek peace in the comforting embrace of alcoholism. For legal reasons, I'd like to state that alcoholism is not an escape and I don't endorse day drinking. Since I'd need a steady supply of water, I emptied out a separate wine bottle and filled it to the brim. The water was running for now, but it certainly wouldn't last forever. Before I left the diner, I cooked myself a pork chop for some travel rations and headed on to the next building. This next lot was an exciting one. In any longer Zomboid run, you'll need access to some key essentials nearby your base location, and this gas pump was one of those essentials. Without gas, I wouldn't be able to obtain long-term power, which was part of my goal for the bunker.
Doesn't he have a corner?
As if it wasn't obvious, gas also allowed me to reliably fill a vehicle, meaning now all I'd need was to find a vehicle with a key. With that in mind, I checked the first two vehicles I'd found to see if they had a key in the ignition or a key in any of the seats or glove box, but had no luck with either one. So no luck on the key so far, but I mean, I'll check this gas station and then I'll keep looking around. I think we'll find one eventually, hopefully. I scavenged through the gas station to find any key food stocks to throw into the supermarket cart, before deciding it was time to head back to the bunker with my first haul. Given the nature of zombie heat maps in this new update, so far we had been very fortunate. Nowadays, you could find hordes of hundreds of undead just about anywhere, so only having seen 2 or 3 in my first forays outside the forest was pretty lucky. On my way back home, I took the opportunity to check a few nearby cars to see if they had keys. All right, and we have a key in ignition. Okay, now we're cooking with gas. Pun not intended, but still very funny to me. And across the road, fortunately enough, I had my first successful find. As with all looting runs, you have to know when enough is enough. My instincts were saying any longer would be a little dangerous. So with my shopping cart in tow, I headed back through the trees. A successful first day accomplished. So far, looking at my goals, I'd acquired a decent supply of food, and the vehicle I'd found outside the upper car park was a work in progress. But this work in progress was still progress. One can only achieve a larger goal by completing the small all the goals it is comprised of. If only I was as good at surviving as I was at yapping. I spent some time reorganizing the interior of the bunker. It was at best a very small space to work with, and as you'll come to see, I would need every tile I could free up for storage, so the proverbial game of Tetris was an exceptionally important one. After an average night's sleep, I headed back to the upper car park, taking stock of the buildings surrounding me and clearing out any friendly neighborhood zombie mans. Since we're already pretty much aware of our surroundings, I will clear the proverbial fog of war and unpack my location for you. In this larger area, I had some extremely interesting buildings: a doctor's office, a food market, and a clothing store. Would you believe me if I told you the building above was far more interesting than all three? While fending off the undead, I checked the first door to the doctor's office with no success. Without wanting to draw the attention of every zombie in the area, I decided to not break down a window just yet, and instead headed to the clothing store. There was nothing game-changing inside, but I did find a cowboy hat, which would give me a 300% buff to every stat in the game. After swapping out for some fashionable new threads, young people still call clothes threads. Am I old? I'm old, aren't I? Maybe that's not even an old thing.
Shut up, Tranny.
I'm getting distracted. I continued squashing a few undead heads before heading upwards, where I can now reveal the identity of the mystery building: an army surplus store. Well, if it isn't the freaking motherload. At this point, it was safe to say that this was effectively an amazing starting location, having weapons, food, clothing, medical supplies, and a gas station in close proximity was a proverbial gold mine. It wasn't everything I need to accomplish my goal, but it was a hell of a dent. Opting for a safety first approach, I first made sure all the nearest zombies were dealt with. Once that was out of the way, I funneled through every shelf, finding new clothes, vests, some body armor, some weapons like hunting knives, jerry cans, the motherload. But no guns just yet. They were sealed within an impenetrable fortress. There was simply no way an average person could overcome these advanced defenses. Okay, there was a way. But since I was running low on space anyway, I'd come back to this. It's like a mystery box opening. You'll have to wait and see whether I get the god pack. Instead, having now cleared the surrounding area, I headed back to the first building, the doctor's office, and smashed the window. Since I hadn't made an appointment, the doctor was at best displeased, so I knocked some sense into them. Wait, that was a patient. It's an honest mistake. Here's the doctor. After unlocking the door at the front, I brought my cart inside and loaded it to the brim with every medical supply I could find. Given that the cart was quite full, it was time for a trip back home, promising to return for my mystery box opening the next day. Already, I was kind of running into storage space problems, but frankly, if it got that bad, I'd just throw it on the floor. But before I deal with my inner demons, I want to talk about today's sponsor, Wand. With games we have
fuck off. Fuck off. Today's sponsor.
Including anything I missed on the first run. And then returning to my pack opening, armed with my throwaway melee weapons, I began battering the door down. It took a little while, but it was a job well done. And after dealing with a couple of wayward zombies, I started opening crates and cabinets.
All right, let's see if we can't find some big firepower in here.
Of all the great finds, the key ones for my journey forward were the M14 rifle and the hatchets. Like most high IQ Project Zomboid players, I know that axes are far superior to any other weapon, spears and crowbars included. And if you disagree with me, make sure to leave a hateful comment so I feel the deep repercussions of my own words and actions. There's nothing like hate comments to solidify the deep feeling of dissatisfaction I carry with me each and every day. Having loaded the supermarket cart to the brim, I was gonna head home before I realized that this van in the corner actually had a key in it also. So instead of taking the cart back, I loaded it into the trunk of the van. This van would effectively be my first vehicle. I got it up and running with some gas I'd filled up in a bottle, picked up a trailer from the diner earlier, and did a few looting runs of the remaining stuff within the nearby buildings. Even this garage that I'd missed earlier, which had a small fridge I'd be able to install in my bunker. All that I'd need to do is then drive this van through well, a forest. I don't know why I thought this would work, but it was pretty miserable, to say the least.
Okay.
So with that nightmare over, let's take stock on our list of goals. We officially had a vehicle, food, and meds. Water was a work in progress that I'm sure we could manage over time, but there were two big goals left, one of which would certainly be, as always, a bit more challenging. In order to get power to this bunker after the water shuts off, I would need to know how to power the generator that came with it. Normally, finding a generator magazine is one of those things you just try and knock out as you go, but in this case, it was the next one on the chopping block. I was gonna have to try and fast track it to get our bunker up to snuff. That would mean planning our first larger trip outside of this area, since I wasn't lucky enough to find one up to this point. Now, truth be told, this van wasn't in the best shape, so after doing some looting, I spent time trying to level up my electrical skills, which was easy enough with some nearby computers and the clocks in each building. The big goal here was to get enough experience in both of these skills to, you guessed it, hotwire. And after spending a solid day in combination with the books I'd acquired so far from my looting, I was hotwire ready, hotwire capable, hotwire handy, which brings me all the way back to this ute or truck. I don't know whatever you want to call this, but where I come from, it's a ute, alright? With this thing hotwired, I moved the trailer across to it and drove it back to my bunker. And I definitely didn't get stuck in my poorly made path and have to cut it out. With my storage capacity now well and truly surpassed
Oh
by my
Lord,
storage
am I baked
requirements,
right now.
I placed down some crates that I'd picked up from the army surplus, filling them up quickly. Now we could start cooking on our generator magazine plan.
Hello.
Having not found one so far, my first plan was to get to the nearest bookstore. Unpacking our larger area, the nearest bookstore was in this small town a few miles down the road. Having never visited it before, I had no idea how congested it would be, and then you have to account for the new heat maps and things could get pretty cagey pretty quickly. But equipped with a decent supply of weapons, I was confident I could take down any issues in my way, even if I was frankly a little rusty.
I don't really know what to expect from this town. I don't think I've ever been here, ever, so it could be absolute chaos. We're just going to play it safe and I'll definitely not get hurt, probably, maybe.
So this goal would initially seem like a pretty simple one, although truth be told, I don't know if a generator magazine will be within this bookstore. I could only hope. But such was the nature of Build 42 that plans like this could quickly spiral. What started as a simple looting run in one little shop would become a battlefield. The more and more zombies I took out, the more that appeared. I cleared the first group but decided I wanted to return to the car, and it wasn't a plan I thought through well at all.
That's not good. That is not good.
Bruh. You really can't be overconfident in Project Zomboid. You take enough time off and you make sloppy mistakes like that. Fortunately, it wasn't a bite, so I'd hopefully escape this one unscathed in the long run, but I did need a rest for a while and recover my energy in a nearby field. Then I headed back across, opting to go for a strategy that would save on energy and time. Now, if I'm being completely honest, this was a plan fueled by one thing. They had just released ragdolls at the time, and so I kind of just wanted to f around and find out. And it was a fun idea, if nothing else. I slammed into zombie after zombie, having the time of my life. It was a little cagey pumping my way over all these corpses, but there was a tangible bump of feedback with each new one added to the pile. It was addicting. Unfortunately, there's a reason this is a dangerous strategy in the game, especially with a trailer attached.
That's fully upside down. That is oh no, get out. Oh no. Oh, I don't even know I don't know if I can flip the trailer, but I might be cooked here. I would have to shove it back over. Oh, man. Good things never last.
Yeah, I kind of the proverbial bet on that one, but you live and learn, and we had fun, right? For now, because of my transgressions, I was forced to fight this one on the ground once again, leading away zombies and using the nearby fence to trip them for an easy kill. This was a time-consuming process, but eventually, after being exceptionally patient, I made my way through, and was finally able to enter the store. A hard-earned victory that will pay off perfectly without issue.
Yeah, that's brilliant, Brent. Oh, dude, I'm gonna go for the books. This is a bad idea. This is a bad idea. This is a really bad idea.
At this point, I was becoming more and more familiar with stuff going terribly wrong, but I had to risk looking inside to see if there was a generator magazine to be found, and to try and funnel out as much as I could. This was quite frankly a terrible idea, but as more and more things go wrong, you start to become desensitized to them. Fortunately, I somewhat made it out, dumping my cart full of books in a driveway nearby and quickly shuffling into the car. I could come back for the cart, but I wouldn't want to be running around without a vehicle. I pummeled through a few undead on the road and parked the car nearby. Believing that there was no generator magazine within the bookstore, I'd have to pivot. I needed this magazine if I was going to survive past the power outage. That was the crux of this situation. But at the same time, there were still some books inside that might be useful. It was just that the hour was getting later and I was running out of juice. I ran around trying to figure out an opportune moment to reacquire my supermarket cart. It was at first ineffective, but if you're patient enough, you'll eventually find an opening. After a few minutes, I found exactly that. Running through to grab the cart and lugging it back to the ute. This was by no means smart, but it was the decision making of a man who had gotten really a little tired of this. Despite all of the terrible tragedies along the way, I was finally out. Freedom from the surprising horde that lurked around this bookstore. So this wasn't ideal, but I had acquired a bunch of literature at the cost of one injury. In terms of our goals, we still needed the generator magazine to get power up and running. And like I'd mentioned, water was something we'd probably find in a water cooler at one point or another. Our tool stocks were getting there, but we were missing some key tools before we could check this one off too. I checked a few of the nearby houses hoping for some kind of exceptionally lucky magazine spawn, but no luck on that one either. After returning home and dropping off my loot, I mulled over my options.
I still feel like there's probably books in there that I need. Like, I only checked maybe half of them, and my injury's like mostly healed up now, so I think we should go back.
So initially I was gonna double, triple, quadruple check the bookstore. Given how many hoops I would need to jump through to go beyond this bookstore, making sure that I hadn't missed the magazine would be a worthwhile trip. And given that I'd already drawn enough attention with the alarm, I figured I might as well go loud. So with the bookstore now cleared, I checked for a second time, without an alarm in my ear, and no magazine. That meant things would have to get a little bit more interesting. So before doing anything, I found a nearby ute the same as my own and decided to do the old switcheroo. A new ute would mean a lot more durability, given how much damage I caused when slamming into the undead the day prior. I returned home to my bunker and deposited what I collected, returning to the town the same day and looting a nearby farming store. Truthfully, there wasn't a lot of stuff I needed, but it helped me collect some of the tools I was missing, and there was, you guessed it, more ammo in here. Plus, I got some farming and fishing supplies in case I wanted some more long-term sustenance plans. I was now on the path to checking more places for a generator magazine, but looting these high-value locations along the way was kind of a no-brainer. It helped me check off my other goals in the process, making this generator magazine the final part of my journey. Knowing any trip further out would be easier from here, I decided to stay one night in the town itself, heading to a house on the outskirts and holding up for a good night's sleep. Then in the morning I hit another high value location in a tool shop a bit further down the road. There were a fair few undead around and inside the building, but with a machete I'd acquired in the army surplus, it was simple enough work. Fortunately, this tool store was pretty stocked up, and I managed to get my hands on what I'd call the last key tool for my journeys ahead, a sledgehammer. That meant I could finally check off tools on my list for a successful base, which certainly made these little side trips worth the time. Since all this looting had occupied a decent chunk of the day, I checked some nearby houses once again, hoping for a bit of a lucky break in search for this magazine. But after having no luck, I slept in my car for the night, given that I was extremely drowsy. Unfortunately, in the morning I'd have to return to the bunker. Don't get me wrong, I loved my little home, but I was aware that any time I headed back, it was a long drive back out. But at this point, my ute storage was way too full to continue. So I returned, unloading a heap of loot, and finally took some time to do some base improvements before my last, well, hopefully last, big trip. A full redesign wasn't in the plans just yet, and frankly, there's only so much you can do with a tiny space like this. But as you can see, I now had a television that I'd acquired on my travels, allowing me to watch some shows and acquire skills. And since I was so close to being able to craft my own crates, I headed outside and laid out the wall frames for some future walls. I don't know what the plan was here, but I did it anyway for the skill levels. With those skills, I was finally able to build some new crates, with more space than the ones I'd acquired from the army surplus. So I shifted out the old and in with the new, building new crates in the entry space and funneling my loot into separate chests based on their category. Normally I'd throw everything on the floor, but to do so in a space this tiny would feel a bit egregious even for me. And if you hadn't noticed, I'd also acquired a water cooler, giving me a decent supply of water to get me through the first few weeks. That meant we can actually check water off our list. So after all was said and done, I was firmly locked onto the now final goal for this adventure, to acquire the mythical magazine and get power set up for my long-term survival in this adventure.
I feel a deep sense of concern that this generator magazine is going to be impossible to find. And it's a real problem because, like, well, it's not really a problem. I mean, we could grind the electrical, but I'm super lazy and I don't want to do that. And so I'm kind of just hoping I'll find the magazine. But if history is anything to go by, that might not be the case. But first, we'll try some more places. We'll head Riverside way.
My first stop was the school in Riverside. This was a pretty simple run in and out, since for some reason it wasn't too congested inside. But by no surprise, based on my luck at this point, there was no generator magazine. This was becoming a running thing. I did nab every book that I hadn't seen in my travels yet to add to my collection, but my search would have to continue. So as to be expected, my search would become progressively more and more dangerous the further I had to travel. The next option was a bookstore on the main street of Riverside. At first it seemed like this this would be a pretty quiet area. These spaces can often be deceiving because of how many zombies would hide inside the buildings. I pulled up out front of the bookshop and started swinging, but fortunately there wasn't too many in my vicinity, so clearing the undead was pretty achievable. Heading inside, I knew I was due some luck. This was now my third location in search of this magazine. I knew if this bookstore failed, things would start to get challenging, and as I'm sure would be no surprise to you at this point, no generator magazine. This was a situation I'd encountered before. This magazine being so essential to progression in terms of setting up power made it a pretty essential find. But after checking through 3 bookstores, I feared the luck was just not on my side. So like any comfortable survivor, I would have to make some tough decisions. I could traverse to the next bookstore on the path or admit defeat and grind through the electrical skill requirements to learn the skill natively. And at this point I decided the latter was the right choice. In surviving the apocalypse, sometimes a certain but uncomfortable truth is better than an uncertain possibility. But my adventure was not over yet, because my run through Riverside would uncover at least a small compensation for the troubles I'd been through up to this point.
I could be wrong, but I believe I just saw a disgustingly juicy vehicular machine in the police station car park. Yeah. Yeah, I'm gonna need to get that. That's gonna need to be mine, I think. I admit, in all my travels, I have never driven a vehicle quite like the one I spotted across the road. But I couldn't get ahead of myself. There were a bunch of zombies in this area, and I still wanted to quickly check the service station here for the off chance I might find a generator magazine. And this quick stop turned into all-out war. With the area for the most part now cleared, I could cross the road and acquire the behemoth that awaited, my consolation prize. And this monster was in great shape. Not only did it have space for me to fit all of my loot, but the car parts themselves were in great condition. With my new partner on this adventure acquired, I headed to a nearby house in Riverside to hole up for the night. The next day I headed in the direction of home, but on the way I made the strange decision to redirect to Rosewood. Because what kind of man would I be if I gave up? What would that make me? If I was the kind of person to fight so hard in this search for the Holy Magazine, that would make me weak. No, just one more bookstore. I could do this. And this bookstore would finally be the one to break the drought, to set me free. Anyway, the Rosewood bookstore didn't have the magazine either. So yeah, I pretty much just brute forced it. Working my way through houses, grocery stores, travel agents, barber shops, disassembling every single electrical device I could see. It took some time, but at this point it didn't even begin to compare to my magazine search. Finally, after hours and hours of work, inside the Rosewood police station of all places, I disassembled the final light I needed and acquired the level I was after. It was a relief. Finally having accomplished what I desired for so long. Since I had already come this far and I'd managed to get a police station key from a zombie I'd taken out earlier, I headed into the back room and took what ammo and weapons I felt would come in handy, stuffing them into my new moving machine, filling it to the brim. It was loaded with books, weapons, ammunition, food, water, stuff that I collected across this massive journey. And finally, after so long, it was time to return home. It was a long trip, but a satisfying one. I reached the bunker in the early hours of the morning and called it a night. And in the morning, I unloaded my belongings and loot. After this adventure, I had finally checked off the last item on my list. I had a generator connected and powered. That meant that this bunker was exactly what I needed it to be. A safe base in this undead world. But the truth is, a base like this is only so good when you're lacking the one thing you really miss. Some friends along the way. Yeah, I think it's about time I get back to that, huh?